burn it to the ground. Every loading dock, every safe house, every man who so much as breathed near her. Rafael Castellano said it quietly, almost gently, and that was how the 6 men in the room knew he meant all of it. He didn't shout. The king of the South Side never had to, but the city would remember the night he went looking for a payroll clerk named Josephine Calloway. Because by the time they carried her out of that frozen slaughterhouse and into the light, the man they called the Iron Crown, the one who'd buried his own godfather without a flicker, was on his knees in the blood and the meltwater, weeping like a boy. Nobody saw that coming, least of all her. Josephine Calloway had spent 29 years perfecting the art of not being seen. She was the bookkeeper at the Aviary, a velvet and brass jazz supper club on the near south side of Chicago, the kind of place where the martinis cost more than a day's wage, and the men in the back booths never paid for anything at all. To the bartenders, she was Josie. To the suppliers, she was the heavy-set gal in accounting. To herself, on the bad mornings, she was a size 22 woman who'd learned to fold into corners, to wear cardigans 2 sizes too big, to keep her honey-brown hair pulled back so it wouldn't draw the eye. She wore tortoise shell glasses she didn't strictly need anymore, and kept them anyway, because a thing you can hide behind is worth keeping. What she did not do, and this is the part the men who ran the place never bothered to understand, was apologize for the one thing she was extraordinary at. Josie could read a ledger the way a scummelier reads a vintage. She could glance at a column of numbers and feel the wrongness of it in her teeth before she could explain it. Other people balanced books. Josie listened to them, and the dishonest ones always hummed off-key. Everyone at the Aviary knew the club was a front. You didn't say it out loud, but you knew. The supper club washed money for the Castellano family, an operation that ran liquor imports and waterfront freight and 3 legitimate-looking real estate trusts from a corner office on the 2nd floor. At the top of it sat Rafael Castellano himself. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, with prematurely silver-shot black hair and a stillness that made loud men go quiet when he entered a room. He'd taken the family at 33, after his uncle had tried to sell the docks to the Volkov Bratva, and had subsequently been found, what was left of him, in a barrel off Calumet Harbor. Raphael did not raise his voice, and he did not make threats. He made decisions, and other people made the threats on his behalf. Josie had been terrified of him for 4 years. She assumed he had never registered her existence. A man who'd been photographed with a string of lacquered, weightless women, the kind with collarbones like architecture, surely looked straight through the round-faced clerk who handed his consigliere the monthly reconciliations and then practically dissolved back into the wallpaper. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about it more completely than she could have imagined. Because the truth was that Rafael Castellano noticed everything about Josephine Calloway, and had for years. He noticed the way she pressed her tongue against her teeth when a number didn't sit right. He noticed that she hummed Billie Holiday under her breath when she thought the office was empty, slightly flat. Always the same 3 songs. He noticed that she tipped the dishwashers out of her own pocket on Sundays and pretended it was a clerical accident when anyone asked. In a world built entirely out of beautiful liars, Josie's plain, stubborn honesty was the one warm thing he could put his hands near without it turning to ash. So he didn't. He kept his distance, because Raphael had long ago accepted a hard arithmetic about himself. He ruined whatever he loved. Better to watch her from the doorway than to bury her later. That arrangement held until a Thursday in the middle of February, the night the blizzard came in off the lake. The aviary closed early because of the storm. By 10:30, the last of the staff had pulled on their coats and pushed out into the white, and Josie was alone with the hum of the walk-in coolers and a problem she'd been circling for 3 weeks. There was a hole in the books, not a sloppy hole, not a rounded-off skim by some bartender pocketing 20s. This was surgical. Over 14 months, just shy of $3 million had been routed out of the family's central holdings and into a daisy chain of shell entities, a landscaping LLC, a defunct printing company, a consulting group with a registered agent in Wilmington and no employees, and every thread of it, when she pulled it taut, ran back to the same hand. Marcello Trent, the family's most senior capo, the man Raphael trusted with the harbor. Josie sat very still in the blue light of her monitor and understood, with the clarity of a person watching their own house catch fire, that she now knew something that could get her killed. In this world, finding a traitor was nearly as fatal as being one. You weren't supposed to see. Seeing was the crime. She reached for her bag. "Go home," she told herself. Feed the dog, lock the deadbolt, forget the printing company exists. The thing about being invisible is that nobody comes looking for a ghost. "Working late, Josie?" The voice came from the doorway, and her blood went to slush. Marcello Trent filled the frame of it, a slab of a man, 50-some, with a boxer's flattened nose and the dead, patient eyes of someone who had stopped finding other people interesting a long time ago. Behind him, just visible in the dim hallway, stood two of his crew, hands resting easy inside their coats. "Mr. Trent," she managed his name. Her hand drifted without her telling it to draw her cardigan closed across her body. The old reflex, make yourself a smaller target. I was, the reconciliations. I was just finishing. He came toward her unhurried, glanced at the screen she'd already darkened, then at the glass of the framed print behind her, where the ghost of the shell company directory still glowed in reflection. He smiled. It was the worst thing she'd ever seen. "You're a sharp one, always have been." He braced both fists on her desk and leaned in, and the smell of him was bay rum and old bourbon. Trouble with sharp girls is they got no idea which numbers are theirs to look at. "I don't know what you mean." A tear betrayed her, sliding down before she could stop it. "Sure you do, sweetheart. That's the whole problem." He straightened, buttoned his coat with 2 fingers, almost regretful. "I always kinda liked you." He snapped his fingers, and before she could draw the breath to scream, a gloved hand sealed itself over her mouth from behind, and an arm like a steel cable hauled her up out of her chair. She fought. She was not a small woman, and she did not go easy. But soft strength is no match for men whose whole trade is hurting people, and somewhere in the struggle, a chemical-soaked cloth pressed against her nose and the brass and velvet of the room smeared down into black. Raphael Castellano slept 4 hours a night, and rarely well. When his private phone lit the dark at 6 in the morning, something cold and animal turned over in his chest before he ever lifted it. "Talk," he said. It was Theo Lindqvist, his right hand, and Theo's voice. Theo, who'd watched men die without losing the thread of a sentence, had a hairline crack in it. "Boss, Josie Calloway never went home last night. I'm standing in her apartment right now. Doors kicked off the hinges. Place is turned over. Her dog's locked in the bathroom, going out of its mind. A pause that lasted a year. She's gone." Raphael did not say anything for a moment. He was looking out the floor-to-ceiling glass of his penthouse, at the lake gone iron-grey under the dawn, at a city that had no idea it was about to become a very dangerous place to be. The coffee in his other hand had stopped existing. He could feel his own pulse in the old scar on his knuckle. "Who?" he said, not a question. A sentence being handed down. "We don't know yet. No camera on her floor." "But, boss, whoever it was, they knew the building. They knew which unit. Lock the city." His voice had gone somewhere flat and far away, the place it went right before terrible things happened. "Nothing leaves the harbor. No truck crosses a county line. Ground the planes. Pull every man we have and every favor we're owed." Raphael. Theo tried gently to put logic into the machine. "She's the payroll clerk." The glass of the penthouse window actually shivered when he answered. "Bring her to me. I don't care what it costs or who it costs. And Theo, whoever put their hands on her, I want them breathing when I get there. That part is not negotiable. For the next 16 hours, Chicago learned what it looked like when the king of the South Side stopped being patient. The Castellano organization came down on the underworld like weather. Card rooms were emptied at gunpoint. A chop shop on Cicero burned. Men who'd spent decades certain of their own importance found themselves face down on cold concrete, answering questions through split lips, and Raphael led it himself. He traded the $4,000 suit for a black tactical shell and a sidearm, and his silver-shot hair went wild, and his eyes went to a blue so pale and so flat that the soldiers around him stopped meeting them. He kept thinking about her humming, the flat little Billie Holiday under her breath. The thought of someone hurting her, quiet, decent Josie, who tipped the dishwashers and pretended she hadn't, made something behind his ribs go incandescent. By 9 that night, a low-tier runner weeping gave them a place. A defunct meat-packing plant down in the old stockyard district, a hulk of brick and rusted rail that the family had stopped using years ago. The kind of place you took someone when you didn't intend for them to come back out. Raphael's SUV took the chain-link gate at 50 without slowing. He was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped, a suppressed pistol low in his grip, Theo and a dozen armed men spilling out behind him into the snow. They went through the steel doors and the dark erupted in muzzle flash. He moved through it like he had nothing to lose, because in that hour he was fairly sure he didn't. 2 of Trent's men stepped out from behind a pillar, and Raphael put them down without breaking stride, without blinking, a man made entirely of forward motion. When the gunfire stuttered out, 4 bodies lay across the freezing floor, and the only sound was the wind howling through the broken skylights. And then he saw her, and everything in him went out like a snuffed candle. At the far end of the killing floor, under a single industrial bulb swinging on its cord, throwing her shadow back and forth across the concrete, Josie was zip-tied to a steel chair. Her cardigan was torn half off one shoulder, the pale skin beneath it scraped raw and going purple. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, the lid a sick shade of plum. She had her chin tucked down and her shoulders curled in, the posture of someone trying, even now, even here, to take up less room. The most ruthless man in Illinois dropped his weapon to his side and crossed that floor at a dead run. Josie. His knees hit the wet concrete in front of her, and he was already reaching for the blade in his boot, hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. He sawed through the ties and they snapped, and her weight slumped forward into him, soft and heavy and warm and alive, and the sound she made, a small broken animal sound, flinching from his touch, undid something in him that had been welded shut for 20 years. "No, please, I didn't tell them anything. It's me." His voice cracked clean in half. "Josie, it's Raphael. You're safe. I have you. I swear to God, I have you." He folded his arms around her, around the full width of her, and pulled her off that chair and into his lap right there in the filth, and he pressed his face into her tangled hair, and his enormous shoulders shook, and Theo Lindqvist, who had known him for 15 years and had never once seen it, looked away to give the king his privacy. The Iron Crown of Chicago was crying, and the whole crew pretended very hard that they couldn't tell. She forced her good eye open and looked up at the terrifying man, cradling her like she was something precious, something irreplaceable, and through a mouth that hurt to move, she got it out. "Trent. It's Trent. He's been stealing from you, almost 3 million. Even now, even gutted." The numbers came out of her first, because the numbers were the one thing she'd never doubted about herself. "I know," he whispered into her hair, his thumb wiping a track through the blood and grime on her cheek. "I know, sweetheart, I know." And that was when the slow, mocking applause started from the catwalk above them. Raphael's head came up and his eyes died. Standing on the rusted gridwork overhead, one arm hanging useless and bandaged where one of Raphael's men had already caught him, was Marcello Trent. And he was not afraid. He was grinning. In his good hand he held a fat manila folder. Look at this. Trent's voice rolled down through the cold air. The king and the fat little numbers girl. I gotta say, Rafa, I did not have this on my card. All that runway tale over the years and you go soft for that? You're already dead, Raphael said. There was nothing in his voice at all. You just haven't lain down yet. See, that's where you're wrong. Trent tossed the folder over the rail. It hit the concrete and slid, spilling paper. Bank statements, wire confirmations, scanned signatures. When the commission asks me why I had to take care of your bookkeeper, those are gonna show that she's the one who's been bleeding the family dry. Every fake transfer points right back at her terminal. I'm just the loyal capo who caught a thief. You move on me without proof. The Volkovs and the New York seats call it a breach, and your whole house goes to war over a girl who skims spreadsheets. And with his good hand, he brought up a short, ugly rifle from where it had hung against his back, and leveled it down at the man kneeling on the floor with his arms full of a wounded woman. Shame she fought so hard when we tried to bring her in, Trent said, and his finger went white on the trigger. The first burst tore the silence apart. Raphael did not dive, did not roll, did not lift his weapon to answer. He threw his whole body over Josie, wrapped himself around her like a wall, buried her face against his chest, and let the world come apart on his back. Concrete exploded into shrapnel inches from them. A round punched clean through the trauma plate over his left shoulder blade, with a sound like an axe into a log, and he grunted, low and through his teeth, and his arms only tightened, so fierce she could feel his heart slamming against her cheek. Faster than she'd have thought a man that calm could ever go. Before Trent could correct his aim, the dark opened up from the flank. Theo had taken the far stairs. 3 flat coughs from his suppressor, and Trent shrieked as his thigh blew out from under him, the rifle clattering off the catwalk to ring against the floor below. Bleeding from 2 wounds now and screaming curses, Trent dragged himself backward into the shadows of the upper loading bay and was gone into the storm. Boss! You hit? Theo was already pounding across the floor, his men fanning out to chase the blood trail into the night. Raphael ignored the fire spreading across his back. He pulled away just far enough to see her face. She was shaking in great rolling waves, her breath soaring in and out. Her fists knotted in the front of his vest, smearing his blood into the torn wool of her cardigan. I'm okay, he lied, voice tight as wire. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the wounded one across her back, and with a grunt that pulled the wound wide, he stood, lifting her clean off the floor. She gasped and grabbed for his neck on instinct. Raphael, you're shot. Put me down. I'm too heavy. Stop. It came out of him low and absolute, and she stopped. He looked down into her ruined face with those pale eyes burning now, alive again, and what was in them stole the breath right out of her. You're not too heavy. Right now you are the only thing in this entire city worth carrying. Do you understand me? She swallowed a sob. In 29 years, no man had ever held her bulk and called it anything but a problem to be managed politely around. And here was the most dangerous man in the Midwest, bleeding through his own clothes, carrying her like she was a crown he'd just pulled back out of the mud. And the strangest thing was, and she hated a little, how strange it was. She didn't argue again. 20 minutes later, the armored SUV rolled down into the private garage beneath his building on the lakefront. He bypassed every hospital in the city. Hospitals had cameras and questions, and Trent's men were still out there. A discreet physician the family kept on retainer. A quiet man called Dr. Aldous was already waiting in the penthouse with his bag open. The next hours blurred. Antiseptic, suture thread, low, urgent voices. Aldous wanted to do Raphael's shoulder first. The bullet had skipped off the plate and gouged a deep furrow, but spared the bone. Raphael refused the painkillers and sat in a leather chair with an untouched glass of rye, his eyes never once leaving the woman on the long velvet sofa across the room. Josie had 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, and bruising into the deep tissue of her shoulder and side. When the doctor gently parted what was left of her cardigan to clean the worst of it, she dragged her arms across her stomach, a flush of old shame climbing her throat hotter than the pain, because the penthouse lights were merciless, and she was suddenly acutely aware of every soft inch of herself laid out in front of strangers. Raphael saw it. He set the glass down, came across the room, and dismissed Aldous with one short tilt of his head. When they were alone in the heavy quiet of all that glass and money, he lowered himself to the floor beside the couch so his eyes were level with hers. He reached out with his good hand and very carefully drew her crossed arms down away from her body. "Don't," he said. "Not from me. I'm a mess." Fresh tears. "I'm beat up and I'm fat and I'm the girl who does payroll. I don't. Why are you doing this, Trent? Almost killed you. Because of me. Trent is going to die because he laid a hand on what's mine." The correction came out of him like a low rumble underground. He leaned his forehead gently against hers. "And you've got the wrong idea about yourself, Josephine. You always have. You think I never saw you? I've spent 4 years watching you balance my books and hum off key when you think the floor's empty and slip the dishwasher's cash you can't really spare. Everyone in my life is a beautiful lie. You're the only honest thing I've got left in the world." His thumb moved over her bruised knuckles. "I don't care about the 3 million. I never did. I care that you're breathing." Her breath caught somewhere it couldn't get past, and then the double doors opened, and Theo stepped in with his face grim and the blood-stained manila folder in his hands. "Boss, you need to see this before you decide anything." He laid it on the glass table. Trent's frame is clean. Wire logs, forged signatures, digital fingerprints. The whole thing built to put the theft on her terminal. To the commission it reads exactly like Josie skimmed the 3 million, and he was the loyal man who stopped her. We hit him without proof of the lie. New York and the Volkovs call it a breach, and we're in a war we can't win. Raphael's jaw locked. The cold tactician and the thing that wanted to burn the world went to war behind his face. Josie pushed herself upright against the cushions, wincing as her ribs screamed, and put out her hand. "Give it to me." "You need to rest," Raphael started. "Give it to me," and something had shifted in her voice. The tremor gone clean out of it. She might be battered, she might be terrified, but put a forged ledger in front of Josephine Calloway, and she became the most dangerous predator in any room. She settled the heavy glasses up her nose and went to work, and the men watched her do it. It took her 4 minutes. Her finger came down on a scanned page and stopped, and a small, crooked, triumphant smile broke through her split lip. "He's not as smart as he thinks," she said. He backdated the biggest forged transfer to make the timeline work. Used a real notary, Hartley & Voss, the firm over on LaSalle, and a real notarial stamp, dated the 14th of last month. "Look at the certificate." Her fingernail tapped the date. The 14th was the day of the ice storm. The city shut the courts and half the loop closed by 10 that morning. Hartley & Voss posted on their own website that the office was dark all day. There is no universe where a notary in that building stamped a live signature on a document that afternoon. The whole keystone of his story is physically impossible. Theo's eyes widened. It collapses the entire chain. It does more than that. Her confidence was surging now, her bruised face going almost luminous with it, and Raphael looked at her like a man watching a sunrise he'd given up on. He had to put the real money somewhere. Trent isn't clever enough to wash 3 million without dropping crumbs. "Get me a clean laptop and I won't just prove the frame is fake. I'll find where he actually buried your money, and I'll find him." Raphael stared at her a long moment, and what settled into his chest was something close to reverence. He turned to Theo. "Get her whatever she needs." For 3 hours, the only sound in that vast, quiet apartment was the steady, certain clatter of a keyboard balanced on Josie's lap. She moved through proxies and back doors and corporate registries like a conductor working an orchestra she'd written herself, and Raphael sat across from her in the dark, with his rye untouched, watching the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she was closing in, the way her soft, quick fingers flew, and he thought she was, without any close competition, the most magnificent thing he had ever been allowed near. "There," she breathed and brought her hand down on the key. "Got him." He was at her side before she'd finished saying it. "Show me." He didn't keep it offshore, too obvious, and he's lazy. She pulled up a scanned trust document. He laundered it through 2 shells and parked the whole thing domestic, a corporate trust account at a private bank in Milwaukee. And look who he listed as the secondary signatory. Raphael read the name at the bottom of the page, and the temperature of his blood dropped 10 degrees. "Anton Volkov," Theo said from the doorway very softly. "He's not just stealing from you," Josie said. "He's financing a takeover. He was going to use the family's own money to bankroll the Bratva moving in on the harbor." The skim wasn't greed. It was a war chest. "And where?" Raphael asked, in a voice gone glassy and calm. "Is Trent right now?" Her fingers moved again, slipping into the booking systems of a small private airfield north of the city. He chartered a flight under his late wife's maiden name. Tail numbers a Gulfstream out of Waukegan. Wheels up in 40 minutes. He's running for the Volkovs before his leg even stops bleeding. Raphael leaned down and pressed a long, fierce kiss to her unhurt cheek. "You're a genius, Josephine. Sleep. I'll be back before light." She caught his wrist before he could rise. Her good eye found his hard one, and for the first time she wasn't trying to disappear. "Come back to me. That's all I want. Just come back." "I'll always come back to you," he said, and he meant it the way he meant the violent things, which was to say, completely. The runway at the Waukegan field was a sheet of black ice and blowing snow. Marcello Trent paced at the foot of the jet's air stair, dragging his ruined leg, sweating through the bandage despite the cold, snapping at the ground crew to load his duffels faster. He didn't hear the SUVs until their headlights all came up at once out of the white and pinned him there like a moth. A wall of armed men poured out and closed a steel ring around the aircraft, and from the center of it walked Rafael Castellano in a long black overcoat, one arm tucked into his pocket, a silenced pistol loose in the other hand. He looked like a debt coming due. Trent went for his waistband. He never cleared it. Raphael's first round shattered his good knee, and the capo went down screaming onto the frozen tarmac, both legs gone now, clutching at the ice as the king walked toward him without any hurry at all. "You broke faith, Marcello." The engines whined behind them. "You stole from the family. You crawled into bed with the Bratva." "Rafa, we came up together. It was just business." "Business, I could have answered with business." Raphael crouched, took a fistful of the man's wet collar, and pulled him close. "But you put your hands on her. You left marks on her skin. That's the one ledger that doesn't balance." "She's a fat nobody." Trent shrieked it, the last defiance of a man with nothing left. Raphael's eyes went all the way out to that flat, empty place. "She's the queen of this city," he said. "And you're already a ghost." He set the barrel against Marcello Trent's forehead, and the snow swallowed the sound of it. Then he stood, wiped a fleck off his cheek with the back of his hand, and turned to Theo. "Send what's left to Anton Volkov. Tell him the Castellano family sends its regards, and bring our money home." "Where are you going, boss?" He was already walking back toward the SUV, back toward the lake, back toward the warm, lit window, 40 floors, up where someone was waiting for him for the first time in his whole armored life. "Home," he said. 3 days later, the late sun came pouring gold through the penthouse glass. The bruising on Josie's face had faded to dull yellows and greens, and she could breathe now without the knife in her side. She stood in front of the tall mirror in the dressing room and did not look away from herself. She was not wearing a cardigan. There were no cardigans left. Raphael had quietly had every drab, shapeless thing she owned given away. What she wore instead was a deep garnet silk that he'd ordered made for her from a house on the Magnificent Mile, a red so dark it was nearly black at the folds, cut to follow every curve she'd spent her life hiding. Drawn in at her full waist, falling clean over her wide hips and heavy thighs, the color throwing warmth up into her face and gold into her hair. For the first time in 29 years, Josephine Calloway looked at her own reflection and did not feel the old apology rise in her throat. She'd known she was smart for a long time. That had never been the question. What she saw now, standing in the red in the gold light, was that the smartness and the softness had always belonged to the same woman, and that woman was not small and had never needed to be. Strong arms folded around her from behind. Raphael set his chin against her hair and met her eyes in the glass. "There she is," he murmured, and his hands came to rest, flat and easy and certain, against the soft curve of her stomach, the place she'd spent a lifetime hiding, the place he held now like it was the safest thing in the world. "I don't look much like the payroll clerk anymore," she said, leaning her weight back into the solid wall of his chest. He turned her in his arms until she faced him, and lifted his hands to frame her face, and looked at her with a tenderness that had no business living in a man who'd done the things he'd done. "You were never just the payroll clerk, Josephine." His thumb moved along her cheekbone, over the last fading shadow of the bruise. "You were the smartest, steadiest person in every room you ever tried to disappear in. I didn't make you a queen. I just got down on my knees in the snow and finally said out loud what you already were. The rest was always going to be your move." She felt something settle in her chest that she'd been waiting her whole life to feel, and it wasn't being rescued. It was being seen and not flinching from it. He bent his head and kissed her, slow and certain, the coldest man in Chicago, and the brilliant, soft-bodied woman he'd burned the city down to keep, and would, 100 times over, without ever once raising his voice.